The researcher who helped develop CRISPR is saying the Columbia embryo editing paper opened the floodgates and called it a gateway to editing embryos for enhancement rather than just curing disease. Northwestern Mutual's new study finds 33% of Gen X adults still feel financially dependent on their parents at age 45 to 61. And MIT research finds that reciprocity, the social expectation that kindness gets returned, only exists between equals. In hierarchical relationships, the giver just keeps on giving. While everybody else was busy arguing about politics, a bunch of other things happened. I'm Keith Conrad, and this is News SideQuest. Last week, we talked about the Columbia University base editing paper, and the conversation has escalated significantly over the weekend. Alexis Comer is one of the researchers who helped develop CRISPR, the gene editing tool that made the Columbia work possible in the first place. Her assessment of the new paper, published in Scientific American, is worth quoting directly. She said, quote, "It kind of opens the floodgates," calling the paper a gateway to embryo editing to do enhancements. She argued that the Columbia team may have broken an existing informal moratorium, a kind of gentleman's agreement that had limited this work in U.S. academic labs, and that unlike the Chinese scientists who shocked the world in 2018 by editing embryos that were carried to term and born, the scientific community appears to be accepting the Columbia work. The cat's out of the bag, as she put it. Hank Greeley, the biomedical ethicist at Stanford, worries that affluent individuals may be inspired by the paper as a jumping off point to edit embryos for purely preferential traits rather than medical necessity. A biomedical ethics committee chair at ISCT called the work worrisome, not for the nature of the research itself, but for what it signals about what's coming next. The lead researcher disagrees with this alarm, as you might think. He points out that the approach demonstrated toxicity, which is not justified when you don't address a medical need, essentially arguing that the technology isn't ready for enhancements because it still creates unintended edits alongside the intended ones. There are two genuinely separate questions here. The first is whether editing embryos to correct fatal genetic diseases is ethical. Most thoughtful people land somewhere in the yes column on that part of it, with varying degrees of hesitation. The second is whether correcting genetic diseases and selecting for preferred traits like eye color or height are actually separable once the technology actually exists. And that second question just doesn't have a clean answer. Now here's my question for you. What feature would you actually want to add to yourself if you could edit your own DNA? I think I'd want some kind of indicator showing when I'm losing interest in a conversation. It would be tremendously useful and save everyone a great deal of time. So what would be yours?
Oh, Mr. DNA, where did you come from? From your blood. Just one drop of your blood contains billions of strands of DNA. The building blocks of life.
Northwestern Mutual just released a 2026 Planning and Progress study, an annual survey of 4,300 adults conducted in January, and the headline finding is one that stopped me mid-doom scroll. 42% of all American adults still feel financially dependent on their parents. Broken down by generation, 72% of Gen Z, which is understandable, 53% of millennials, which is getting a little ridiculous, and 33% of Gen X. Gen X is now aged 45 to 61. The oldest members of this generation are turning 61 this year. About 1 in 5 Americans across every generation say they don't expect to ever be financially independent. The average age of Americans say they achieved or are expected to achieve financial independence is 37, nearly 2 decades after most people finish their education. If you're actually approaching retirement age and still borrowing from your parents, that seems somewhat problematic. Americans are having children later, living longer. Baby boomers, the parents of Gen X, are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s and are living longer than any previous generation. That means the wealth transfer that used to happen in your 40s is happening in your 50s or not at all. Fewer than 2/5 of Americans ever inherit anything. The great wealth transfer that's been predicted for years is real, but it's arriving later and going to fewer people than the headlines originally suggested. The more uncomfortable version of this story is the one we've been tracking the last couple of months. Gen X is the sandwich generation, simultaneously supporting aging parents and adult children, often while carrying the highest total debt load of any generation at over $6.5 trillion. The top reasons Gen Xers raid their retirement accounts are family emergencies at 29%, credit card debt 23%, and rising cost of living at 18%. These aren't people making bad life choices, they're people absorbing pressure from multiple directions at the same time with insufficient margin. Has money ever genuinely complicated a relationship with a family member, and how did you navigate that? I just want to know what that actually looks like in real life, because the survey tells us it's common and no one actually talks about it.
Cause I have $30,000 in credit card debt. When they call, I tell them I can't pay it back yet. Credit card debt. Tomorrow I may buy myself a dining room set or this Boba Fett. Credit card debt, credit card debt, credit card debt.
MIT researchers just published a study in the journal Open Mind that reframes something most of us have experienced without actually having a name for it. The research ran 6 experiments testing what people expect after someone acts generously. The finding: when 2 people are equals, so friends, colleagues, peers of some kind, observers expect the favor to be returned. The social norm of reciprocity kicks in. But when there's a rank difference between them, say a boss and an employee, an uncle and a nephew, a mentor and a mentee, people don't expect the recipient to pay it back. Instead, they expect the original giver to just keep giving. The higher status person is expected to give again, regardless of how the recipient behaved. The researchers put it plainly, quote, expectations of reciprocal generosity are specific to equal relationships. In hierarchical ones, once you've established that you're the giver, that's your role. And it persists even if the power dynamic shifts. If your boss was generous to you when you were junior and you later became their peer, people still don't expect you to reciprocate. The original dynamic sticks. Once you've established yourself as a giver in a hierarchical relationship, you're the giver forever, regardless of where you rank. And the research confirms that's not just a feeling, it's a documented social expectation. The norm isn't be generous and receive generosity in return. The norm is be generous and just keep being generous. This connects to something we've talked about all month in different forms: the gratitude journaling research, the postmodern times restaurant running on donations, Dan the Pizza Man, Luis Salazar returning the $30,000. The question of what generosity actually costs and whether the people doing the giving are getting anything back has been threading through the show all spring. Are you fundamentally a giver or a receiver in the relationships in your life? And has that dynamic ever cost you something you wish someone had noticed?
So we finish 18, and he's gonna stiff me. And I say, hey, Lama, hey, how about a little something, for the effort, And he says, there won't be any money. But when you die, on your deathbed, you will receive total consciousness. So I got that going for me, which is nice.
Episode 9 of the Titanic series just dropped on SideQuests, and this one covers the rescue, the Carpathia's race through the night, who picked up who and when, and the question that has haunted maritime history for over a century: why didn't the Californian respond? The ship that was close enough to help but just didn't. If you've been following the series, this is the episode that might make you genuinely angry. There's a free condensed version for everyone and an extended cut for paid subscribers. Find SideQuests wherever you get your podcasts or at newsidequest.com.
Bravo! The That'll be hard to top. I pity the next. Tale of Interest.
A gaming PC reportedly stopped a bullet fired by a neighbor's dog in Florida. The neighbor left a loaded firearm accessible, the dog stepped on it, and the bullet traveled through a wall and was stopped by the PC's case. The owner was unharmed. There's a whole lot going on in this story. The PC is damaged, the dog is fine, the neighbor has some explaining to do.
It's crazy!
Peruvian cops disguised themselves as World Cup mascots to arrest a suspected drug trafficker who was a die-hard football fan, and they expected him to attend the match. The operation was successful. This reminds me of the time famed opera singer and umpire Enrico Palazzo thwarted an assassination attempt on Queen Elizabeth II.
It's Enrico Palazzo!
A third batch of declassified UFO files includes descriptions of spinning disks, glowing orbs, and one object specifically described as shaped like a potato. If the Idaho Chamber of Commerce isn't immediately all over the potato-shaped UFO story for promotional purposes, I don't know what they're even doing. This is a gift.
You can't suppress the truth. The people have a right to know. Roswell!
A world record was set in California for the largest gathering of Marilyn Monroe impersonators. It seems like the bar for Marilyn Monroe impersonation is relatively accessible. Just wear a blonde wig and stand over a subway grate. And that I mean as no disrespect to the impersonators, who clearly brought commitment to their record attempt.
I don't know whether to congratulate you or not.
I wouldn't.
That's it for new side quests. 3 questions to open your week. The DNA future you'd add to yourself if you could. Whether money has genuinely complicated a family relationship and how you navigated that. And whether you're a giver or a receiver and whether that dynamic has cost you something. Email me at newsidequest@gmail.com or hit me up in the Substack comments. See you tomorrow.